Hey everyone, welcome to my first doodle for integrated mental health. I just wanted to bring this idea and concept to you guys. I use drawing in my office all the time as a way to help create some simplicity out of what can sometimes seem as overwhelming concepts. And today's concept, we're going to talk about three different things. We're going to talk about the brain, and yes, that's a brain. We're going to talk about relationships between mom and baby, and then we're going to talk about outcomes. So we're going to talk about the brain, and then we're going to talk about relationships, and then we're going to talk about kind of life outcome. Alrighty, so let's talk about some basics of the brain to begin with. And the reason why I think this is important is because oftentimes education leads to empowerment. So if we can be educated about something, we generally tend to feel a little bit more empowered in our ability to make changes in our life. So the first thing that we're going to talk about in the brain is we're going to talk about the differences in the hemispheres. So many of you probably are aware that there is a difference in the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere, or that we have left hemispheres. So the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere, kind of draw this. You guys are gonna really love my drawings. This is why I'm a therapist and not an art teacher. So the right side of the brain is involved in, well, the left and the right are involved in a lot of different things, but the right kind of specializes in things that start with the letter R. So you can think about things that start with the letter R, and the first one is regulation, and specifically regulation of emotions. Next one is relationships to others. And the third one that we're going to talk about today is relationship to ourself, right? So if the right hemisphere is involved in things like regulation, relationship to others, and relationship to self, what does the left hemisphere do? And not surprisingly, you can think about things in the left hemisphere starting with the letter L. So left hemisphere has to do with language, linear thinking, and logistics. So language, linear thinking, logistics. They both have very important roles, but today in specific, we are going to be talking about the right brain and the implications on relationships and life moving forward. So what we know from research is that the right hemisphere of the brain develops first, okay? So the right hemisphere is first. And I'll just develop, or I'll use the initials RH moving forward. Right hemisphere is the first to develop. And the right hemisphere is developed through, not surprising, relationships. And regulation. So, what does this mean? It means that when we have mom, again, drawing's amazing. When we have mom and baby, mom's ability to have regulation and relationship with her baby directly corresponds to baby's ability as an adult or as a teenager or a young child to have relationships to themselves or others. Let's draw another human, right? Relationships to others and emotion regulation. So if mom has the ability to have regulation in relationships to baby, baby then grows up to have the ability to have relationships and regulation to themselves and others. So what happens when this cycle does not work? And I have no idea where my red marker is, so I'm going to use a blue marker, but I would really like to use red marker for this. So when we look at this, and mom does not have the ability to have regulation in relationships, so does not have this, no, right? That means that she is not able to give this to baby, which means that as this baby grows up, they are not going to be able to have regulation and relationships themselves. So when we think about the fact of what does it feel like to not have regulation and not have relationships moving forward as an adult, one could argue that that is the basis of all mental health issues, really, on a certain level. So not having the ability to have relationships, or emotion regulation, I should say and or emotion regulation is a huge deal. Why? Well, the World Health Organizations have stated that depression is the #1 cause of disability worldwide, throughout the whole world. I'm not even going to draw it. This is the world. Right? #1 cause of disability in the world. The World Health Organizations has said that depression is the #1 cause of disability worldwide. So when we think about emotion regulation and not having relationships, it's really important that we think about it from many different viewpoints. One of them being looking back at the person's relationship with their mother or their maternal their maternal ability, their mother's ability to regulate herself or have a relationship with herself. So it doesn't just have to be that there was emotional neglect or absence or a void. It can be maternal dysregulation through depression or another mental health issue, through substances, right? So some of the things that cause an inability to have regulation in relationships is mental health, substances. I'm getting marker all over. Right? And, oh, by the way, if we take this back, their parental relationship. So we think about a potential for treatment and moving forward in integrated mental health. One of the ways that we specifically work on this is through the utilization of neurofeedback and another process called internal family relationships. It helps the client to learn relational patterns within, which helps with emotion regulation moving forward, which makes sense, right? If we can teach somebody to have a relationship within themselves, that's a whole nother doodle where I will talk about internal family systems and parts and what that means. But it makes sense that if we can have somebody learn how to have a relationship with themselves and be kind and compassionate to themselves with things that are going on inside, they almost can they definitely can repair and work on this relationship and regulation that wasn't there. So as an adult in therapy, my two favorite ways to work through this and change this and make this a possibility are internal family systems, which we use IFS as a way to talk about that, where people learn how to have relationships and regulation with younger parts of themselves, which then ultimately allows them to be able to be a functioning, healthy adult and have emotional regulation with themselves now. So I want you to hear really loud and clear that through therapy and also through neurofeedback, specifically working with the right hemisphere of the brain, that if this is the case for you, that you didn't get this, or this is a pattern of regulation or dysregulation that you feel like you want to interrupt, there are absolutely ways to change this, some through more neurobiological approaches and some through more psychological approaches. So all that to say, pay attention to your maternal relationships. This is not just psychobabble. It actually is really important in the way that we develop and how the brain develops early on and how we learn to have relationships and emotion regulation moving forward. And as we talked about here, not having relationships or emotion regulation is huge. Number one cause of disability worldwide. So if you have any questions or comments, feel free to reach out to me. Otherwise, stay tuned for some more doodles. All right, take care.